Maybe you still remember that first moment. It wasn't anything big. There was no music playing. It didn't seem like an important event. But there was something there. A look, that silent look, that didn't ask for anything, but at the same time seemed to say everything, as if he already knew you. Now answer me honestly. Have you ever had the feeling that your dog didn't come into your life by chance? As if, somehow, he already knew exactly who you were? Because if you've ever felt this way, this video could completely change the way you see this relationship. Today, you will understand why some encounters are not coincidence. Why do certain dogs seem to arrive at exactly the right time? And why, perhaps, your dog chose you, before you even knew you needed him. And no, this is not about fantasy. It's about something that millions of people feel, but almost no one can explain. Maybe you remember the way he looked at you for the first time. Maybe it was on the street, or inside a shelter, or even when someone placed him in their arms. But there was a moment, an exact second, where something changed, as if that look had penetrated any defense, any distraction, and had gone straight for you. And the strangest thing? You didn't choose logically. It wasn't because he was the prettiest, not the strongest, not the most perfect. It was something different, something silent, as if, without realizing it, you had recognized him. Now think with me. Why, among so many dogs, was it just him? Why that one, and not another? And why even today, do you still feel like there is something special, something difficult to explain? If you've ever lost a dog, or if you still have one by your side, maybe you know exactly what I'm talking about, because this feeling won't go away. She stays. She accompanies you when you remember the sound of his paws around the house, when you arrive, and for a second, you still expect to find him at the door, or when you look at an empty corner and feel that there is still something. And maybe that's exactly what no one has ever explained to you. Maybe that meeting wasn't the beginning. Maybe it was a reunion. But before you jump to any conclusions, there is something you need to realize, something that almost no one notices at first, and that changes everything when you understand. After that first look, life just went on. Or at least, that's what it seemed like. Because little by little, he began to occupy spaces that no one had occupied before. Effortless, without asking permission. Maybe you didn't even realize it at first. But he started following you, around the house, from the bedroom to the kitchen, from the kitchen to the living room, from the living room to the bathroom. Always silent, always close. As if his presence was more important than anything else. And the most curious thing? You got used to it. It became routine. It became something normal. Someone there, always accompanying you, even when you didn't say anything. Now think with me. How many times have you been doing something simple? Playing on your cell phone, washing the dishes, sitting without thinking about anything. And when I looked, he was there. Just watching you. No charge. Without interrupting. Just present. That kind of presence that doesn't weigh down. But that somehow sustains it. And maybe you didn't even stop to think about it at the time. But today, that's needed, isn't it? Because after he's gone, or even now if he's not around, there is a strange emptiness, a silence that didn't exist before. The house remains the same. The furniture is in the same place. The routine still happens. But something changed, and you feel it. Maybe it's the sound, or rather, in the absence of it. Because before, there was that sound of paws around the house, a simple sound, almost imperceptible, but constant, a reminder that you were not alone. And today, the silence seems too loud, and it's not just that. Maybe you also remember how he seemed to know things, how he felt when you weren't well. Without you talking, without you explaining, he just got closer. It pulled over. It stayed there, as if to say, I know. Now let me ask you a question. Have you ever felt like your dog understood you better than most people? If this has ever happened to you, write here in the comments, he understood me. Because when someone writes that, you're not just talking about one animal, you're talking about a bond, something that goes beyond what we can explain in simple words. And maybe this is where it all starts to get deeper, because when you put it all together, the look, the presence, the shared silence, the way he followed you, as if he didn't want to move away even for a second, it starts to seem like it wasn't just company, it was connection. A connection that didn't need to be built, because deep down, it was already ready. But then an inevitable doubt arises. Could this all have been created over time, or did it already exist before you even met? Are they? Because there is a story, a true story, that can make you see all of this in a completely different way. There is a story that many people would ignore as a coincidence, but those who lived never managed to forget. A woman said something curious in the comments of a video like this. She said she never wanted to have a dog, never made a point, never looked, never missed it. Until one ordinary day, returning home, something happened. She was walking distracted, thinking about her own problems, when she felt she was being followed. It wasn't dangerous. It was light, almost silent. When she turned around, she saw a dog, stopped, looking directly at her, and it wasn't just any look. It was fixed, calm, as if he was waiting. Not for just anyone, but for her. She tried to ignore it. He continued walking, but the dog started following her. No barking, no running, without invading space, just following along, street after street, block after block, until she stopped. He looked at him again, and she said something that not even she knows why she said, "Okay, you can come." And at that moment, he approached, without hesitating, as if that had already been decided, as if he was just waiting for her to remember. She took the dog home that day, but what stood out the most wasn't that. That's what came later. She said that, in the first few days, she felt something strange. It wasn't fear. There was no doubt. It was familiarity. As if that dog already knew the house. As if he already knew where to stay, where to lie down, how to act. But mainly, as if he already knew her. He followed her around the house, sat next to her in silence, and he looked in that same way as he did on the first day. Deep, gift. And over time, something even stronger happened. In difficult times, he was always there. Before she even cried, before she even realized she wasn't well. He was getting closer. It pulled over. It stayed. As if he was responding to something she hadn't even said yet. Now think with me. How many stories like this are out there that people just ignore? How many times does a dog appear in someone's life at exactly the right moment? And why? Coincidence? Luck? Or something that we haven't yet learned to explain? Now pay attention to this, because this part changes everything. She said that one day, looking at him, she had an unexpected thought. I didn't choose you, Anna, right? And in that moment, he just looked back. In the same way, without deviating, no rush. And she felt it. He felt with a certainty that was difficult to explain, that somehow, he had already chosen her long before that meeting. Now tell me, what if this isn't just an isolated story? What if this happens to more people than we realize? What if, in your case, weren't you the one who chose it too? Because from here, we need to face a possibility that could change everything you believe in. Now this is where it all starts to get uncomfortable. Because accepting that you chose your dog is easy. It makes sense. It's logical. You saw it, you liked it, you decided, you took it home. End of story. But what if it wasn't like that? And if this explanation is just the simplest version of what is much deeper? Think with me calmly. Among so many dogs, so many places, so many possible moments, why was it exactly that? Why that day, at that time, in that emotional state? Because if you look at it honestly, you'll realize that many times you weren't even looking. Or I was going through something difficult, or he was feeling alone. Or was it in a moment of change? And suddenly, he appeared. Has this ever happened to you? Because when we start to connect these dots, the idea of chance starts to become fragile. And you don't need to go to the extreme mystique to realize this. There is something real happening. Science has already shown, for example, that the connection between humans and dogs activates deep areas of the brain linked to bonding, protection, and affection. Hormones like oxytocin, the same people involved in the bond between mother and child, are also released in this relationship. In other words, your brain recognizes your dog as someone important, very important. But this raises another question. Why does this happen so intensely to some dogs? Why do some come into our lives and just change everything? It's not just affection. It's not just company. It's something that affects identity. With routine, with emotion, with who you are. Now imagine this scene. You arriving home, before you even open the door, you can feel it, as if someone was waiting. And when the door opens, there he is, in that usual place, at that same point, as if he knew exactly when you were going to arrive. This is not just habit. It doesn't just seem like a coincidence. It seems in tune. Now let me ask you, have you ever felt like there was a connection with your dog that you couldn't explain to other people? Something that, if you tried to put into words, would it sound exaggerated? But you know it's real. You felt it, and maybe I still feel it. Because this type of connection does not fit easily into common explanations, and this is exactly where the conflict arises. A part of us wants to believe that it's just coexistence, time, routine, but another part, quieter, deeper, whispers something different. It didn't start here. And the more you remember, but this feeling grows. The way he followed you around the house, the way he seemed to anticipate her feelings, the way he looked, as if he understood everything. It doesn't look like something built from scratch. It looks like continuity, and that can be uncomfortable, because it breaks everything we learn to believe. But also, it can explain a lot. It might explain why it hurts so much when they're gone. It might explain why the silence in the house is not just silence. It's the absence of something that felt like part of you. And maybe, just maybe, we have understood everything backwards until now. But before getting to the answer, there is an idea, simple, almost forgotten, that can completely change the way you see this relationship. There is an idea, simple, almost silent, but when you allow it to enter, it changes everything. What if some encounters don't start in this life? For a second, breathe and think about it calmly, because maybe the relationship you had with your dog, it didn't start the day you first saw each other. Maybe that moment wasn't a beginning. Maybe it was continuity. And that would explain something that to this day doesn't make logical sense. Why was the connection immediate? Why didn't it take time? Why, from the first day, there already seemed to be something there? Now remember that look, that first one. Silent, direct, effortless, that kind of look that doesn't ask who you are, because you already know. And perhaps, this is the part that moves us the most, because deep down, you didn't feel like you were getting to know him. You felt like you were recognizing it. Now pay close attention to this, because this could be the sentence you take with you after this video. Maybe he didn't come into your life. Maybe he came back to her. Let that echo for a moment. Because if that's true, everything changes. The meaning of that first meeting changes. Change the weight of memories. It even changes the way you see absence, because it would no longer be just a dog that passed through your life. It would be someone who was part of it, before you even remember. Now think about everything you lived with him. The simple moments, ordinary days, the shared silences. None of this seems small when you look at it from this angle. It feels part of something bigger. As if there was a story that didn't start there, and it didn't end there either. And maybe that's why, even after they leave, the feeling doesn't go away. The presence changes, but it doesn't disappear. Now tell me, honestly, do you ever feel like somehow he's still around, even if it's in small details, in memories that appear out of nowhere, in habits that you still maintain, or even that inexplicable feeling of company? If you've ever felt this, write here in the comments, "He's still with me." Because when someone writes that, you are not denying reality. She is recognizing something deeper than herself, something that doesn't depend on the body, but the bond. And it is exactly this bond that we need to understand now, because if he didn't start here, so maybe it won't end here either. And what does that mean? It may be even stronger than you imagine. If the bond didn't start here, then the question changes completely. It's no longer, why did he come into my life? The question becomes, why did he come back? And when you look at it from that angle, some things start to make a lot more sense. Mainly, the intensity. Because it's not normal to feel so much for so long by someone who, theoretically, was in your life for a few years. But with him, it was different. It was profound. It was true. It was complete. As if, in a short time, you had experienced something that other relationships cannot do in a lifetime. And maybe that happens because these links are not created from scratch. They are resumed. There is an ancient idea, present in several cultures, which talks about soul pacts, connections that are not born in a single moment, but they go through different phases of existence. And within this idea, some encounters are not accidental. These are commitments, presences that return when you need them most. Now think with an open heart. When he appeared in your life, were you really okay? Or was going through something difficult, silent? Something that few people realized, because many owners report exactly that. The dog arrives, and without making any noise, it starts to sustain, welcome, balance, as if it had a function, like it was there for a reason. And this becomes even more evident in more delicate moments. Those days when you didn't want to talk to anyone, but he was there. Those moments when everything seemed heavy. And somehow, it felt lighter with him around. This isn't just company. This is conscious presence. And maybe that's why the pain of loss is so intense. Because it doesn't feel like you lost an animal. It feels like you lost someone who was part of you. Someone who occupied an emotional space that no one else occupies. Now let me ask you a question, and try to answer by feeling, not thinking. Why does his absence still feel so present? Even with time passing, even with the routine continuing, there is still something, a living memory, a feeling that doesn't dissolve. And maybe that happens because the bond was not meant to end. It was made to continue in another way. Many people report things they cannot explain. They feel as if the dog is still around, at specific moments, on difficult days, in important decisions, or even in dreams that seem too real. And no, this doesn't need to be seen as something strange. It could just be an extension of the bond. Because when something is true, it does not depend only on physical presence to exist. Now, if that makes sense to you, write here in the comments, our bond continues, because when you say that, you are not fooling yourself. Are you recognizing that some connections, They don't follow the common rules. And here's something important. Something that almost no one talks about. Maybe he didn't just come to receive love. Maybe he came to teach you something. About presence, about loyalty, about loving without conditions, and mainly, about remaining, even when it is no longer visible. And maybe, just maybe, he is still fulfilling this role, in a quieter way, more subtle, but still real. Because when a bond is true, it doesn't disappear. He transforms. And what does that mean, at the end of it all? It can completely change the way you view absence. And that's exactly what we need to understand now, in the last step. Maybe now. You'll go back to that first moment, the one that seemed simple, that look, silent, direct, almost impossible to explain. But now, he doesn't seem the same anymore, does he? Before, it seemed like the beginning of everything. Today, maybe it looks like something else. Maybe it feels like a reunion. As if in that moment, two stories that were separate had crossed paths again, and that completely changes the meaning, because that look is no longer just a memory. It's proof that there was something there, before you even realized it. Now think, if he recognized you at that moment, if he approached as if he already knew, if he accompanied you as if he had already done this before, so maybe you have never been a stranger to him. And maybe that's why it hurts so much when he leaves. It's not just nostalgia. It's the feeling that something essential is missing, like the sound of paws around the house that never came back, like that place where he slept that still looks occupied, like silence. That was never the same. But what if this silence is not empty? What if he's just different, more subtle, less visible, but still present? Because if the bond didn't start here, so it doesn't make sense for it to end here. And maybe that's exactly what you feel when you remember him. It's not just a memory, it is active connection. It is something that continues to exist, even without form. Now, let me ask you one last question. And he answers honestly. What if he's still with you, just in a way you haven't yet learned to understand? Not like before, not with steps, nor with barks, but with presence, with energy, with that same bond that never depended on words. Because maybe the biggest mistake is not feeling like he's still here. The biggest mistake is thinking that he really left. And before I finish, keep this with you. Maybe that first look was not a coincidence. Maybe it was recognition. And maybe, right now, on some level that we still don't fully understand, he is still recognizing you. And if that made sense to you, if at any point you felt like your dog was more than just a dog, so maybe you already know. Some links are not created, they are remembered, and when they are true, they don't end. They just find new ways to carry on.